is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
New DRC President Felix Tshisekedi calls for unity as he steps into the presidency. C.A.R. rival factions in Khartoum for negotiations. And Zimbabwe government declares music legend Oliver Mtukudzi a national hero. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, coming to you from Nairobi. I am Peninah Karibe. We begin in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Residents in the eastern city of Goma have been celebrating the country's political transition. Goma is a stronghold of presidential runner-up Martin Fayulu, but many of its residents watched newly elected President Felix Tshisekedi being sworn into office in Kinshasa on Thursday. They are optimistic that the change in regime would bring peace and unity in the country.
When people watch the handover between President Joseph Kabila and Tshisekedi, they truly felt this is a historic moment. Nobody could believe it would happen. No one thought Joseph would hand over power to a radical opposition leader. It's historic.
Personally, I would like to thank President Joseph Kabila because in Central Africa, this is the first time we are witnessing a peaceful transfer of power from the former president to the opponent. It has never happened in Central Africa. Many thanks to the Congolese people for their maturity during the polls, because this has become our strength. We can say that we have become a role model in democracy.
Felix Tshisekedi called for national reconciliation during his inauguration. His ceremony was held in the capital Kinshasa and was well attended by the Congolese. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta was the only foreign head of state in attendance, and the nation sent government officials and foreign ambassadors to witness the occasion. CGTN's Tuli Shabalala has that story.
It's a day that will go down in the history books. A peaceful transition of power since independence 59 years ago.
Tshisekedi Tshilombo Félix Antoine, élu président de la République démocratique du Congo. Je jure solennellement devant Dieu et la nation.
The son of the founder of Congo's longest-running opposition party, sworn into office as President of the Democratic Republic of Congo. In his first speech, Felix Tshisekedi called for reconciliation and vowed to promote development in peace and security.
We want to build a strong Congo with its cultural diversity and its attachment to the motherland. A Congo turned toward its development in peace and security. A Congo for all, in which everyone has a place.
It was a jubilant occasion. Hundreds of Congolese came to witness the inauguration ceremony. On the eve of the day, outgoing President Joseph Kabila praised the election process and congratulated his successor.
It is also symbolic of the growing crystallization of the democratic culture in our country, that the lucky elected official, the beneficiary of this historic alternation as the head of state, came from the opposition party. This is the opportunity for me to reiterate, on your behalf and as well as of my own, our congratulations and best wishes for the success of President-elect Félix Antoine Tshisekedi.
Ainsi que nos vœux de plein succès. It was a fiercely contested December 30th poll. The Constitutional Court ruled that Felix Tshisekedi won the elections by 38.5% of the votes, while his rival Martin Fayulu received just 34.7%. The Southern African Regional Group SADC and the U.S. State Department are among those that have welcomed Tshisekedi's victory. The African Union, which was supposed to send a delegation to the country on Monday, postponed the trip. One of Tshisekedi's first tasks will be to appoint a prime minister. But only time will tell if Kabila will continue to play a leading role in the country. His party is the biggest in the new parliament. But for now, as Tshisekedi and Kabila stand side by side, they signal a new dawn for the Democratic Republic of Congo. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
The U.S. government has praised the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo for their insistence on a peaceful and democratic transfer of power. From Washington, Daniel Wrenches reports.
Last week, the US said it recognizes the legitimate concerns over the transparency of the electoral process in the DRC after the provisional publication of official results. The Catholic Church organization Senko had deployed over 40,000 election observers across the country at more than 75,000 polling stations. It concluded there were major disparities with the official results. The Congolese government then rejected calls by the African Union to suspend the election results and a request by the Southern African Development Community, SADC, for a recount. Now, the US State Department says it is committed to working with the new government and is encouraging, quote, broad representation of Congo's political stakeholders and to address reports of electoral irregularities. The statement recognizes President Kabila for being the first president in DRC history to cede power peacefully through an electoral process. Daniel Wrenches, CGTN, Washington.
Europe, on the other hand, is still wary of expressing any support for the Democratic Republic of Congo's new president, Felix Tshisekedi. Belgium and France say they are concerned about how the elections were held, and the European Union has only said that it has noted the decision of the DRC Constitutional Court. Our Europe correspondent Jack Parrock reports from Brussels.
EU officials here in Brussels have potentially opened the door for some kind of cooperation with the incoming Tshisekedi administration. Federica Mogherini, the EU's top diplomat, says the president of the DRC must be a unifying force. She's also called on all political actors and civil society to remain peaceful as the transfer of power takes place. While the European Union has not officially recognised Felix Tshisekedi as the winner of the elections, Brussels says it will continue to work with the government of the DRC and that it notes the result. The first thing the EU will want is to see its ambassador reinstated in Kinshasa. Previous President Joseph Kabila threw out the ambassador after the EU sanctioned a number of people in the DRC over alleged human rights abuses, one of whom was Emmanuel Ramazani Shadari, who contested the elections for Joseph Kabila's party. One of the first things Felix Tshisekedi is likely to do when he takes office is to try to secure the return of his father's body. Etienne Tshisekedi, who ran the Union for Democracy and Social Progress Party before his son, died here in Brussels 2 years ago. But former President Joseph Kabila never allowed his body to be repatriated over concerns it would stir unrest from the then opposition. Felix Tshisekedi has said that the fact that his father's body has been held in a fridge here in Belgium for so long is torture for his family, who want to return him to Kinshasa to be buried. Jack Parrock, CGTN, Brussels.
Central African Republic's rebel groups are in the Sudanese capital Khartoum for peace talks. The factions are participating in the round of negotiations with the Bangui government. The gathering is organized by the African Union. Security, governance, power sharing, reintegration and the demobilization of armed factions are some of the issues on the agenda. Since 2013, the C.A.R. has been plagued by religious and ethnic conflicts. Hundreds have been killed and displaced in the Central African nation. The United Nations and Sudan say they are optimistic about the talks as the parties have shown willingness to move forward with the peace process.
We have been working with our brothers on both sides of the C.A.R. to resolve the conflict, and there is willingness to end the unrest and move forward with the country. We hold great hopes in our brothers to reach a comprehensive peace agreement that will end the country's suffering.
We hope that 2019 will be the year of peace in the Central African Republic. We at the United Nations and the Security Council support efforts to achieve comprehensive peace. The United Nations supports the efforts of the African Union and all international parties. We also support the efforts of Central Africa and the parties involved in the peace process, especially the Central African Community and the international community in general.
The Intergovernmental Authority on Development is concerned that the implementation of the South Sudan peace process is running behind schedule. South Sudan President Salva Kiir and former Vice President and rival Riek Machar are yet to reach a power-sharing deal. The deal paves the way to a final peace agreement that will form a new government of national unity. IGAD's mediation and support unit, together with the EU's equivalent body, are meeting in Kampala to discuss this. Here's CGTN's Hilary Ayasiga with more.
Promoting regional security, IGAD members plot strategies to end conflict and war in South Sudan. But they are worried the process is taking longer than it should.
We urge the parties to expedite the implementation. There are some of the clauses that are behind schedule.
In September 2018, South Sudan's warring parties signed a power-sharing deal to end a civil war that has killed tens of thousands and displaced millions in the world's youngest country, but it is yet to be implemented. Both parties in the peace agreement set a target of 8 months to form a government of national unity. But with less than 4 months remaining, it seems they are unlikely to achieve this goal. The South Sudan government says it does not have the money to follow through on the peace deal.
Having problem of funding, we seek funding from outside, and those who are supposed to fund the agreement, they are dragging their feet, moving slowly. But we are moving. It is a very big challenge.
South Sudan is looking for resources to move warring forces into a government military camp, a move seen as vital to addressing security in the country. They also want to restructure public service to include opposition members in the government of national unity. Last year, the country's parliament approved about $20 million for the peace process, but only $1.6 million has been realized. And South Sudan hopes the two-day meeting here in Kampala will convince development partners to commit funding to support the implementation of the peace process. Hilary Ayasiga, CGTN, Kampala.
Zimbabwe's army has said soldiers accused of beating residents in townships following protests over fuel price hikes were imposters who tarnished the name of the military. Security forces have been cracking down on violent demonstrations that erupted last week after President Emmerson Mnangagwa decreed a sharp increase in the price of fuel. Rights groups say a dozen people have died in the unrest, though police put the figure at 3. Zimbabwe National Army spokesman Alpheus Makotore said those involved were not bona fide soldiers. Meanwhile, China has condemned the violent protests as a way to address or tackle the economic issue in the Southern African nation. Demonstrations over high fuel prices turned violent last week. Zimbabwe's economy took a turn for the worse towards the end of last year. There is a severe shortage of dollars, fuel and medicine, while inflation hit 42% in December.
Every country has its own problems. But the way is that we must work harder and try to find solutions. Strikes and vandalism will not create any solutions. Only dialogue and hard efforts will bring new life, new future, bright future to all of us. And we have strong confidence in the leadership of President Emmerson Mnangagwa.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take our first break this hour. Coming up, Egypt beefs up security nationwide ahead of uprising anniversary. And US orders withdrawal of all non-essential embassy staff.
How will your world change today? What happens here What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. My home country lies at the foot of Africa, the southernmost tip of our beautiful continent, and the unique point at which two great oceans meet. Now on a clear day in Cape Town, you can just make out Robben Island, the place where Nelson Mandela was jailed for so long. South Africa has changed so much in the years since then, but it is this country's history that shaped me and took me into reporting. I'm inspired by Africa's men and women of courage. It's the everyday hero who brings out my passion. The creatives, the decision makers, the risk takers who are shaping a bright African future. I see them in Cape Town. I see them in the pulsating city of Johannesburg. I see them across the continent, and I know our time has come.
CGTN is a platform where African voices can speak for themselves and take their stories to the world. My name is Lindy Mtongana, and I'm a news anchor and reporter for CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is in India. He arrived on Friday for talks with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Talks between the two leaders are expected to touch an array of issues, but will focus specifically on higher education and training, arts and culture, home affairs, as well as defense and energy. India is one of South Africa's top trading partners, with bilateral trade of $10 billion last year. On Saturday, Ramaphosa will be the guest of honor at India's Republic Day parade.
This is a historic visit for us as South Africans, because we're here not only to consolidate the relationship between India and South Africa, but also to remember the great leaders that our two countries have had, Gandhi and Mandela.
Back home in South Africa, the Zondo Commission into allegations of state capture, corruption and fraud in the South African public sector began hearing testimony from the ex-COO of facilities company Bosasa last week. CGTN's Angelo Coppola has more.
Angelo Agrizzi has been testifying, giving eyewitness statements and accounts and providing evidence and recordings allegedly outlining Bosasa's criminal activity. And that ranged from bribery to money laundering and racketeering, and was focused on winning tenders from departments, specifically the Correctional Services Department, and controlling the National Prosecuting Authority. The bribery didn't stop at the tender awards, though, according to Agrizzi. He listed monthly bribes to officials in various government organizations, packed into grey bank bags and handed over in restaurants, private homes and on the side of the road. He confirmed, though, that between $285,000 and $430,000 was paid to 38 government officials and ministers every single month. Agrizzi says he was responsible for counting out the cash every month and keeping records in a small black book. And when the NPA began investigating Bosasa, its CEO, Gavin Watson, began bribing 3 National Prosecuting Authority executives to block the investigation, successfully as it turns out, as no criminal charges were laid since the investigation was completed nearly a decade ago. 2 of those officials are now the subject of a separate commission of inquiry. And then Agrizzi released a recording outlining the apparent relationship between Watson and the ex-president Jacob Zuma. We expect to hear more about this when Agrizzi continues his testimony. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Egypt's army, backed by the police, is beefing up security presence nationwide ahead of the 8th anniversary of the January 25th uprising that overthrew long-term ruler Hosni Mubarak. The army says military forces will be deployed to secure vital sites and major roads. There are no official celebrations to mark the 18-day revolt of 2011, but the country is using the opportunity to take stock of strides made so far. Here's Adel Mahri with more.
Back in 2011, Tahrir Square has been the focal point of unprecedented wave of protests in Egypt's modern history. Tens of thousands took the streets demanding change, most of them youth. Ala Assam is one of those who've excitedly joined the protests as popular move against President Hosni Mubarak was getting bigger. During that time, Ala was leading the marches of his socialist political party, Al-Tagamma.
We still need to work on social justice and economic empowerment. We need to invest in production, to increase domestic components in products. We must move Egypt away from the dependency of the one-man rule to a state with institutions, to have strong legislative, judicial and civil entities that run the country.
25th of January is Egypt's Police Day. It commemorates 50 policemen who died and got injured in 1952, refusing to drop their weapons against the British Army. In 2011, the protests broke in objections to police abuses against citizens.
The Constitution confirms that January 25th was a revolution. And when we saw the President this week mention it during the Police Day celebrations, this means we've passed the stage of hard feelings. In 2011, we clashed with the police, then the police sacrificed their lives for us. Then we turned to protecting the police stations when they were under attack. The police now take major civil roles. They pay from their own salaries, which is not much, to support the poor.
8 years have passed and Egypt is still struggling to bring back its economy to pre-2011 status. Cairo is clearly in political stability, but there is a war against terrorism that is still far from being over. So much has been achieved, still many hope for more. The youth who've sparked the January uprising have been divided. Many have been imprisoned as they continued their opposition. Few like Ala are still into politics, and some have made it all the way to parliament to shape the country's future. 8 years onward, Tahrir Square remains a landmark visited by many Egyptians and a memorial of the hardships they went through in their pursuit for change. Adel Mahri, CGTN, from Tahrir Square in Cairo.
To Mali now, the force commander of the UN peacekeeping mission there, General Denis Gillenspoor, has visited the northern town of Aguelhok following an attack on a UN camp there. The attack left 10 peacekeepers dead and more than 25 others injured. Meanwhile, the UN has condemned that attack.
Our soldiers fought with bravery and with great determination. They defended the camp with success. The enemy failed and flew. Unfortunately, we have killed and wounded soldiers, but I'm proud of the response, the actions taken, and we will continue our operations.
Today is the second payday that 800,000 American federal workers are going to miss. The Senate has rejected competing Republican and Democratic plans to end the partial government shutdown. The Republican bill included funding for President Donald Trump's U.S.-Mexico border wall, while the Democratic plan did not. Instead, the Democrats proposed providing funds in unrelated disaster relief. Earlier, Trump said he's just honored that almost all Senate Republicans voted for his proposal, adding the Democrats lost one that came over to his side. Nathan King has more.
What the US President Donald Trump didn't say in that clip is that he said one Democrat went over to their side for the wall vote, that first vote. But what he didn't say is 6 Republicans went over the Democratic side in the second debate. That was a real surprise for the White House because they've been talking about how unified everything was. The Vice President, Mike Pence, was up on the Hill. He had lunch with senators before the vote. He apparently heard a lot of complaints. So there is starting to be deep divisions within the Republican Party about the length of this shutdown and wanting to get the government open. So what we're seeing here is Donald Trump again in that same meeting that you played a clip of, said, look, I'll wait to see what sort of compromise is offered. And we've seen both Senate leaders from both parties huddled behind the doors. There's talk of some sort of compromise coming forward. We don't quite know yet. The US Congress is actually not in session tomorrow. They're all going home for the weekend. But we'll wait and see. But one option still on the table is the emergency option that the US president said, which is basically declare emergency on the southern border and use funds already allocated to the Department of Defense or related organizations to build a wall. He's asking for $5.7 billion from Congress. He could try and find that money or even more from that. But that would probably put him in the courts. That would be challenged. It may even tie up the wall, but it may break the logjam here in Washington and get the government reopened.
And now to the political crisis still unfolding in Venezuela. Washington has ordered all non-essential embassy staff in the country to leave, but it says it will not comply with an order from Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro to withdraw all U.S. personnel. Rampant violence continues to grip Venezuela. Local rights groups say at least 14 people have been killed in demonstrations this week alone. Meanwhile, Maduro levied a strong stance against the U.S. during a speech at the country's Supreme Court in Caracas. Countries across the world are gearing up to celebrate this year's Chinese Spring Festival. Morocco has hosted an event under the slogan, "Let's spend the New Year at the Chinese Cultural Center," in Rabat. The Chinese New Year is the most significant and monumental festival in the People's Republic of China.
We would especially like to show to our Moroccan friends the profoundness of Chinese culture and see how it interacts with Moroccan culture. We hope this event will further enhance the cooperation and communication of the two cultures, leading to better understanding of each other between people of the two countries. Today's event is very interesting. As an ambassador of China, I wish the event to be a great success.
双方的合作是富有。
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
recap our top stories this hour. We begin in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and residents in the eastern city of Goma have been celebrating the country's political transition. Goma is a stronghold of presidential runner-up Martin Fayulu, but many of its residents watched a newly elected President Felix Tshisekedi being sworn into office in Kinshasa on Thursday. They are optimistic that the change in regime would bring peace and unity in the country. Central African Republic's rebel groups are in the Sudanese capital Khartoum for peace talks. The factions are participating in the round of negotiations with the Bangui government. The gathering is organized by the African Union. Security, governance, power sharing, reintegration and the demobilization of armed factions are some of the issues on the agenda. Since 2013, the C.A.R. has been plagued by religious and ethnic conflict. Hundreds have been killed and displaced in the Central African nation. Zimbabwe's army has said soldiers accused of beating residents in townships following protests over fuel price hikes were imposters who tarnished the name of the military. Security forces have been cracking down on violent demonstrations that erupted last week after President Emerson Mnangagwa decreed a sharp increase in the price of fuel. Rights groups say a dozen people have died in the unrest, though police have put the figure at 3. And Egyptian authorities have stepped up security in and around the country's public spaces as the country marks the 8th anniversary of the 2011 uprising that forced President Hosni Mubarak to step down. The army says military forces have been deployed to secure vital sites, including Cairo's iconic Tahrir Square, the epicenter of the 2011 uprising. On January 25, 2011, Egyptians took to the streets in massive numbers to protest rampant government corruption and police brutality. And that's a wrap of our top stories this hour. Ahead in business news. Experts now push for South Africa's ailing power utility to be split. And unions in Nigeria reject government's new $75 minimum wage offer.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Experts appointed to review operations of South Africa's power utility Eskom have proposed that it should be split. The team hired to develop a plan to turn around the ailing power company want it divided into 3 separate firms. Media reports say the recommendations will be handed to President Cyril Ramaphosa next week. Reforming Eskom is vital to get Africa's most industrialized economy running. The power utility supplies more than 90% of the nation's power, but it's drowning in debt. One senior ANC source briefed by the task team said it proposed a functional unbundling of Eskom. The suggestion would involve separating it into entities responsible for power generation, distribution and transmission. Ramaphosa's task team also agreed that Eskom needs another government bailout to survive. In Kenya, East African Breweries Limited has registered a 33% growth in half-year net earnings to hit $65.5 million. This has been driven by strong performance across all segments and markets. The Brewers Group revenues grew 13% to $12.1 million. The revenue was driven by strong performance from mainstream spirits, bottled beer and the farm's famous Senator Keg across the region. The half-year results mean that EABL has achieved 91% of the profit it attained in full year ended June 2018, placing it on strong footing in 2019. Corruption is one of the biggest challenges facing Kenya today, wiping out almost $6 billion of the country's budget every year. The country has decided to take on the problem this year with a multi-sectoral anti-corruption summit. Uche Okoronko was there and she brings us this report.
While Kenya is one of the fastest growing economies in Africa, it is also one of the continent's most corrupt. 2018 alone witnessed some of Kenya's highest-profile corruption scandals. The infamous National Youth Service saga saw almost $89 million disappear through dubious deals. In May last year, the National Cereals and Produce Board paid out almost $19 million to faceless farmers. Investors also cite pervasive graft as one of the biggest challenges to doing business in Kenya. Well, the government says its biggest challenge to tackling graft is the lack of public engagement.
We may pass as many laws against corruption, but societal values cannot be legislated. These values constitute the moral fiber of our being and must be learnt and instilled in our national psyche. We all have a role to play in ridding our nation of the scourge of corruption.
A new multi-sectoral initiative put together by the Kenyan Private Sector Alliance is now exploring innovative ways to root out the vice. Engaging different segments of the economy, the National Anti-Corruption Conference is mobilizing key segments to develop anti-corruption strategies to deter graft.
Bring in self-regulation, because what is happening is that we cover each other. You know, we have codes of conduct in the business community, in the private sector. But until we are able to regulate ourselves, bring disciplinary measures and sanction our members and our business community, blacklist and ensure that they cannot be able to participate in business, we will not succeed. So in the private sector, we have to go through the pain of shaming, naming, blacklisting, and saying that we have members who are not fit for business.
For example, Kenya's commercial banking sector is now on the spot over their role in last year's multi-million corruption scandals, accused of helping to launder millions of dollars in dirty money. The central bank recently took over the management of two banks on the verge of collapse due to problems like fraudulent withdrawals. Kenya's Bankers Association says it will be implementing short and long-term policies in order to better monitor the sector.
One of the key initiatives that we identified was the fact that the private sector was heavily involved in pushing for the enactment of the Bribery Act, which was enacted in 2016. And what we could in the immediate time frame is to push for expediting the development of the regulations that will aid in the full implementation of this Bribery Act.
In sectors like education, the aim is to identify the gaps in the school systems that encourage, promote and facilitate corruption.
Working in synchrony with the government to ensure that timelines and service charters are put in place in various Ministry of Education services so that there is no need for bribery to get services. Streamlining those processes so that they are less opaque, and pushing forward the use of technology.
The attempt here is to use the unified approach to inject vitality into the fight against graft, as the government is losing an estimated 30% of the annual budget to corruption. The vice also continues to undermine economic growth, job creation, as well as the country's national security. Ucheo Koronkwo, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Nigeria's national minimum wage crisis is far from over. In fact, things may be just about to get worse as labor unions are threatening fire over the decision of the country's Council of State to peg the newly proposed minimum wage at 27,000 naira, which is about $75. The unions are pushing for 30,000 naira. That's around $83. CGTN's Deji Badmas reports.
It is certainly not what the labor unions had expected. Before now, they had all thought all that was left to be done over the minimum wage dispute was for the government to transmit a bill to Parliament confirming 30,000 naira or $83 as the new national minimum wage. But it was something different that emerged after the Council of State meeting, the highest organ of government in the country, comprising the President, the Vice President, Senate President, Speaker of the House of Representatives and 36 state governors, as well as former presidents of the country.
27,000 is the benchmark
that the lowest paid worker will get. States or organizations that are able to pay more than 27,000 could do so. It depends on the financial capacity. For example, the federal government has resolved that their own workers will not get anything less than 30,000, the least paid federal government worker.
The figure is 3,000 naira short of the 30,000 naira being demanded by labor unions in the country and agreed by a tripartite committee set up by the federal government. The unions have rejected the offer and have called an emergency meeting for Friday to decide on their next move. But the secretary of the Nigeria Labour Congress, the largest workers' union in the country, has given a hint of what is to come. He said, quote, "Workers should not be held responsible for any development after our next meeting on Friday," end of quote.
It is funny that a government would attempt to set a minimum wage 30,000 naira and 27,000 naira. If you segregate minimum wage, then it's no longer a national minimum wage. So you are setting one for public sector and setting one for private sector. You are setting one for federal government. You are setting one for state government. It is no longer a national minimum wage.
The National Council of States that made this recommendation has no legal or constitutional role to play in the process of setting a national minimum wage. So it is a needless crisis that has come into what has been a very painstaking process. And if the labor movement decides to go on strike or take any actions that disrupt everything that has been done, they really will not be blamed.
The government says it will now send a new national minimum wage bill of 27,000 naira or $75 to Parliament for passage into law, and that there will be a review of the wage law every 5 years. Everyone is now waiting for the union's announcement after the emergency meeting on Friday. It certainly won't be anything palatable to the government. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Betting companies in Uganda are facing the prospect of tighter regulations. The country's government says it will no longer issue new licenses to gambling companies. It also plans to stop giving foreign-owned farms permission to operate. As Leon Sanyanga reports, there are fears the move could cost jobs.
Checking the day's odds, this pastime is a daily routine for Ugandan gambler Ben Davis.
I'm used to betting. Even if I lose like how many times, I don't fear. So I keep on going.
Davis is not alone. Gambling is big business in Uganda. A 2015 study showed 1 in 4 adults engage in some form of betting. But with the popularity is coming added scrutiny. Despite existing regulations, betting is still attracting new entrants and clients. Now in a move to restrict the growth of the industry, government says it will not be offering any new licenses. It will also stop renewing licenses for foreign-owned betting companies.
The market is saturated. There are enough players in the market. I don't think there was a free entry of a lot of firms. And I don't think there's such a big market for entry of other gambling firms. And I think the government is right.
There are more than 50 betting companies operating in Uganda. Fewer than half are locally owned.
The local companies have been suffering a lot because of big investments that come with foreign companies, which have been there for years and decades. And if you're a new company, really you want to manage the money they bring in the market.
Uganda's National Gaming Board estimates revenues from betting have increased by at least 3% to $13 million over the last 2 years. But despite the growth, some industry workers fear tight licensing restrictions, especially on foreign-owned firms, could cost them their jobs.
If the companies are closed, then that means I have no job. If I have no job, what next for me?
Regulating gambling in Uganda still faces substantial capacity problems. For the gamblers, they are distraction still remains, even when the government takes a tougher line. Leon Sanyanga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead. Zimbabwe government declares music legend Oliver Mtukudzi a national hero.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Peninah, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa has declared renowned musician Oliver Mtukudzi a national hero. Mnangagwa granted Mtukudzi with a status that has been a preserve for ruling party elites and independence veterans. Mnangagwa has told mourners at Mtukudzi's house outside Harare that the decision to confer national hero status on the musician was unanimously made by his government and the ruling party. Affectionately known as Tuku, he died on Wednesday after suffering from diabetes, ending a career that spanned 4 decades that allowed him to create 66 albums. In Burkina Faso, young Burkinabe visual artists have organized an art exhibition at the National Museum in the capital, Ouagadougou. The event seeks to provide a platform for young artists to express themselves.
About 36 artworks made of batik, bronze and paintings were exhibited to the general public at the Musée National de Ouagadougou. The artworks exhibited address various themes such as peace and social cohesion.
This represents the I in English or the je in French. This is the letter L and then the letter Y. Together, the 3 letters read, I love you. A deaf person who makes this sign to you is simply to tell you that they love you. Why did I decide to work in sign language? It is a way for me to promote sign language, which is not very well known to the Burkinabe public.
The exhibition is an initiative of the Regional Directorate of Culture of the Central Region of Burkina Faso.
Our expectations, of course, is to renew contact or to reconcile with our audience, with our brothers and sisters. Because generally here in Africa, when we talk about works of art, we have the impression that only the West is interested, forgetting that we ourselves can also have the possibility of consuming our own products.
Through this event, the initiators hope to popularize art in Burkina Faso and attract large numbers to the skill.
It is this painting on civility or incivility that impressed me a lot, because that is the problem we are currently facing in my country. And if you look very carefully, it is well written, urinating prohibited. But you see that there is a grown-up person urinating anyway. So it is a really deplorable phenomenon that we are experiencing not only in Burkina Faso, but also in Africa.
According to plastic artists in Burkina Faso, the promotion of culture is vital for the sector's stakeholders. Crafts in Burkina Faso contribute 30% to the gross domestic product. No Makugu, CGTN.
Coming up in sports. CAF throws out Egyptian club Ismailia from the African Champions League.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends